react. You whisper in my name, thinking I won't be the same. Turn fiction into fact. See what you didn't know, bruises that I'll never show, slipping on your every jab. So tighten up your fist, step into the ring with this. I hope your mama's got your back. First round, you thought you would've knocked me down. Fifth round, bleeding out the side of your mouth. Final round, holding the sound of my name in the crowd. You hit a bus. Oh, 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 oh. You hit a bus. Oh, 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 oh. Just 'cause I took a break, you're making a huge mistake, thinking you can take the throne. Look at you trembling, step into the lion's den. Bet you wish you stayed at home. Begging for mercy underneath your breath when I ain't even sweating yet. My legend's written in the stone, yeah. You're crying danger in defeat is now your only friend. Even your mama's gotta know. First round, you thought you would've knocked me down. Fifth round, bleeding out the side of your mouth. Final round, holding the sound of my name in the crowd. You hit a bus. Oh, 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 oh. You hit a bus. Oh, 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 First round, fifth round, final round. Oh, 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 yeah. First round, fifth round, final round. No, 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 no. First round, you thought you would've knocked me down. Fifth round, bleeding out the side of your mouth. Final round, holding the sound of my name in the crowd. You hit a bus. Oh, 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 oh. You hit a bus. Oh, 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 oh.
Hello, hello, and welcome everyone to In Time. My name is 𝗢𝗍𝐿 Soutter. Of course, I got the cameras crossed. It's been a crazy day. I was just glad to be able to get both of you here. Thank you, gentlemen, for joining us. Yeah. Oh,
yes,
dear
I
Lord.
got a promotion.
Yeah, I know you're a commander now. So
From an E5 to an O5. Hey, how can you complain about that?
What's a letter among friends?
What's the
Yeah, exactly.
and this is the second time the commander's been Isandering, so
Well, it's been more than the second time, dude.
Okay, fair. I'll fix it when I got a minute. Not because I know it doesn't bother anyone, but it bothers me. It wears on my nerves. It's like, that's not the right. Oh dear Lord. Well, thank you all for joining us. We are literally just off of a previous show we had on Christopher 𝗲𝗲 and Not Brooks for a discussion on the psychology of politics, and it was both of those are areas that I know a great deal about. But I will tell you something, a huge part of that conversation was well over my head. But it was a very good discussion, and I thoroughly enjoyed it. I think we're going to be making that a weekly thing, so I hope you guys will come back for that. We're also going to have on, hopefully, Commander McMillan and Operator Starsky on tomorrow, Friday, 1 p.m. Eastern. I think there's a lot to discuss about the Ukraine from Starsky's perspective. They've had, if I understand correctly, the largest number of missiles coming in since the war started. So between that, Putin presumably saying a bunch of crazy things, and the missile that landed, or whatever it was that landed in Poland, there's been a lot going on. So first of all, gentlemen, welcome, and thank you so much for joining us as it is.
Well, it's good to be here.
Well, thank you, Xander. Commander, how about you? You glad to be here?
That was me.
Oh, I'm doing absolutely great to be here. Thank you.
Oh, my pleasure.
The audios are switched as well as the video.
Yeah. It's the well, and the cameras too. So, all right. Well, we'll get all that sorted. So, Commander, it has been a very interesting week. To say the least. I think the biggest was, at least on social media, I don't know if you track social media much at all, but Article 5 was trending, and the general consensus was that Article 5 was going to be triggered because Poland was attacked. Even if it had been Russia, for it to be an attack, it had to be deliberate to trigger Article 5, if I understand correctly.
Yeah.
No,
that's totally accurate. I mean, they could ask for it. I think the rest of the members would kind of look at them a bit askance and say, dude, you haven't proven that you're actually under attack, which you need to kind of do. Now, if you'd had more than one missile strike, yeah, then they might have grounds for making that argument. But with just one explosion, I don't think anybody would look at that. I think they definitely would want to go on a higher alert, and I think it's a safe bet to say that NATO will be definitely sending a lot more air defense systems towards the border for the Poles to keep themselves safer. But
it doesn't
no
sound.
Article 5.
It doesn't sound to me like there's it necessarily matters whether it was a Russian missile or a Ukrainian anti-missile defense, or some combination of the two. Since it wasn't deliberate, these kind of accidents happen. It wouldn't trigger Article 5. In either case, everybody's obviously concerned. But do we know what it was at this point? Because we've heard several different reports from several different countries.
Yeah. So the initial reports that came out were that it was a pair of Russian X-101 cruise missiles, which is a semi-stealthy air-launched cruise missile.
Mm-hmm.
And then as the night wore on, it became more and more evident that it wasn't that, or at least not that entirely, that at least some of the wreckage was an S-300 air defense missile, which the Ukrainians have. I'm sure that part of the confusion is that the S-300, even the ones made in Ukraine, have Cyrillic alphabet on them, and they're basically copies of the ones that they used to make for the USSR. So the confusion at that end is pretty straightforward. Since then, the news feed, so to speak, on what really happened has dried up, and in my opinion, remarkably quickly. So I'm not saying there's a cover-up going on, but I think the key is that they're trying to do a deeper investigation to actually figure out what precisely happened. I think it's safe to say that regardless of what happened, this wouldn't have occurred were it not for the fact that Russia is shooting missiles at the Ukrainians. So even if it's not a Russian missile, it's a Ukrainian air defense missile, the Ukrainians wouldn't be shooting air defense missiles unless the Russians were conveniently throwing targets at them for those air defense missiles to engage. So all the accusatory fingers keep pointing in the same direction.
So this was during what, as I understand it, was the largest missile strike from Russia, which, as I understand it too, they're running out of missiles. So was this a last gasp? Was it actually that big a strike? And are they getting more? Or was this all just their terrible stock? What's going on with that?
When people say they're running out, I think it's important to understand what that means. It means they're probably below 50% of pre-war inventory. It does not mean they're, scraping the bottom of the barrel and there's only one left in the warehouse kind of thing. But most people assume that they would be holding at least some of that ordnance as a precautionary reserve should things escalate and NATO perhaps, or who knows, get involved. So what may be going on is they've decided that, this is the last gasp. They desperately need to find some way to solve this. And since the ground operations seem to be incapable of producing the results desired, that they're going to, kind of do the equivalent of the Luftwaffe bombing London during the Blitz. It's terror bombing. It's hoping to cause a failure of national morale and political will on the part of the Ukrainians, such that they will sue for peace and give the Russians at least some of what they want. Now, the likelihood of that happening, in my opinion, is very low. There aren't really any good cases of that kind of strategic terror bombing producing those kind of results. You can argue that we kind of did when we were bombing the North Vietnamese during the war. And you'd see that as bombing escalated, the North Vietnamese would be more inclined to go to the negotiating table in Paris, and when the bombing tapered off, they'd get more inflexible in their demands. But that wasn't the proximate cause of bringing the war to an end. But it was certainly contributory. And I think what's going on right now is, bereft of other options, this is the only weapon, so to speak, still left in Russia's arsenal that they can realistically employ in hopes of bringing about some sort of favorable conclusion to the war.
I want to be very careful about this because, and you know the source as well as I do. There was a source that is an interesting source, has given us information which has been useful, and I'm very glad we have it. But it's an unconfirmed source, and so we can't really rely on it. But the source has said that there are reports that, in fact, there was at least an overture from the Ukrainians, and Putin sort of outright rejected it, said under no set of circumstances, and in fact, in that same meeting, said that he thought the war needed to be expanded, and that was why the scope had been too narrow, and that's why he was having problems. Does that strike you as credible? Have you heard that anywhere else?
What I have heard, I have not heard that, but what I have heard is that the extreme ultra-nationalist wing of the oligarchs behind the throne, so to speak, are talking in those terms, whereas the moderates are more along the lines of, hey, we need to negotiate and put an end to this thing ASAP. Putin's kind of in the middle. He's having both sides pushing on him. Excuse me?
No, I said, oh, Jesus. I'm sorry. It's just Putin as the moderate is something and you've said this before, so I know.
It leaves me incredulous when I hear this and think about it, but it's true. He's kind of the middle solution, which is we will continue to fight, but we aren't going to escalate, but we're also not going to call an end to things. But the key is that, in my opinion, at some point, that becomes a losing proposition for him. Not on the battlefield in Ukraine, but in the battlefield of the halls of the Kremlin. And most likely, because the other side hasn't shown any propensity towards moving in this direction, but most likely you get a coup of some sort or a seizure of power by the ultra-nationalist wing, and they take over. And they have definitely been using that kind of language as, you know, NATO's the great Satan, and the only way we're ever going to solve these problems and put Russia back on the map where it deserves to be is to, you know, use every weapon in our arsenal and force them to concede to our demands. Yeah,
it's genuinely
frightening stuff when you think about it.
Well, it's genuinely difficult to get my head around. I remember, as if it were yesterday, the first time you had said, well, you know, if Putin gets replaced, he's very likely, or reasonably likely, to be replaced with someone worse than him, which it hadn't really crossed my mind that there were worse than him in those circles, but it's been an education. I have to believe that the loss of Kherson, I mean, I keep kind of wondering, is this the one that's going to push it over? Is this the one? But I mean, that was the only city. That was the largest city they had. I think it was the only provincial or regional capital that they had taken. And it's gone now. So other than Crimea, which was already sort of, as far as they were concerned, they owned it. They sort of still have that, at least for now. But other than that, they don't have any gains to speak of other than the Donbass and Luhansk region, which was somewhat separatist anyway. And it's just not. Yeah. So, it sounds like he doesn't have a lot to show for it.
No, and that's one of the key problems here is for him to survive politically and quite literally, probably with his life surviving, he needs to be able to emerge from this situation with at least something positive to show for what the expenditure of wealth, equipment, men, all of it cost him. He has to be able to say, look, but I achieved this goal was achieved. And that's, I won't say the problem, but that's the impasse that we're at right now is thus far the Ukrainians have, in my opinion, rightfully, basically said, stuff it, dude. You get the hell out of our country. You give all our people back and you pay reparations for all the damage you've done. We had nothing to do with starting this war. You did it all on your own. He can't accept that because if he does, he's out, and out means his head is, you know, in a separate container from the rest of his body.
Yeah. Okay. So the other thing that I've noticed, and for me, it looked a lot like they're planning on blowing the dam. I don't know how much they've done with the mines in terms of getting those mines off that dam, but that whole area would flood both sides of the river, and the Russians still are on the east or south, depending on how you call it, river. But they're moving. They are motivated, and they're falling back much faster than they have before, which sort of struck me as okay. they're trying to get out of there before the thing blows. We know that they've been drowning just trying to swim across the river. They've just been desperate to get out of that area, and the Ukrainians can't keep up with them. They're pulling out of there so fast. What's going on, do you think?
As I said the last time we spoke, I think that the Russians intended for this to be a carefully organized and well orchestrated withdrawal from the north slant west bank of the Dnipro. And things fell apart very quickly, and I won't go so far as to say as it turned into a rout, but it certainly became a disorderly retreat. And I don't think the Ukrainians really intended to cross the river. But, the way was open, let's go, boys. And the Russians are in such complete chaos that they're not able to do much about it. I mean, without an intact bridge on the portion of the river that they've secured, they can't get heavy equipment across, they being the Ukrainians in this instant, which means that anybody on the southern slant eastern shore of the Dnipro is in a dangerously exposed position right now. And the fact that the Russians have not mounted an actual counterattack, it sounds like, to throw them back, suggests that maybe they've decided they're just going to keep pulling back into the Crimea and points to the east. They may be planning, I can't say for certain, but they may be planning to completely evacuate the whole oblast, or at least a significant portion of it.
So that would be that area, but that would not be the east, the Donetsk and Luhansk, but that would be roughly around the Crimea area.
Right, up to the Crimea, the top of the peninsula.
So,
now we do know that they've been fortifying the narrow neck, the isthmus that connects the Crimean Peninsula to the mainland. So getting across that will be a lot more complicated.
How defensible is that position? My understanding is most of the water there actually comes from the dam at Kherson, comes from that area. So if the Russians have all of that back, what happens to Crimea?
I assume you meant if the Ukrainians have all that back.
I'm sorry. Yes, if the Ukrainians have control of the water supply going into Crimea, that strikes me as listen, I've never been to war, but that strikes me, the novice, as a poor tactical situation.
I would agree. However, it's worth noting that at least some of the population, civilian population in the Crimea, are Ukrainian. So if you cut the water supply, you're basically condemning Ukrainian citizens to a world of suffering. And it also opens the Pandora's box of, if you cut the water supply, the Russians being able to claim in front of the International Court of Public Opinion that, the Ukrainians are engaged in crimes against humanity. So it's a two-edged sword to pull that trick.
All right.
Now that doesn't mean you can't throttle back on how much water is going through the pipeline.
But the Russians will make sure that the first ones to ration it will be the civilians.
Or the troops. Yeah, exactly.
Or the other ones to, yeah. So, all right. Is there anything else that you can think of that we've missed? Because, please.
The Russians are lobbing a lot of missiles, as I said, because there's nothing else they can do. They're hoping that will exert pressure on the Ukrainians, and thus far it does not appear that it has. But there are hints and suggestions, and people who may have probably do have better sources than we do, that there may be behind the scenes talks going on of a semi-informal nature to set the stage for perhaps opening negotiations. And it could be that the whole pulling out of Kherson is part of the show of good faith, saying, okay, look, we've showed you that we're being good friends and we're giving you back Kherson. Now you need to be nice and tell us that we can keep whatever.
Yeah.
But it's that quid pro quo game that they'd be playing. And I don't think either side at this point wants to open up publicly about what's going on, if there is anything going on. And again, I'm not saying there is. I'm just saying there are little snippets and hints that you see in some of the reporting.
Yeah.
If you extrapolate from that, it may mean that something is actually occurring.
Well, yeah, but it would still be, as you had said earlier, which I think is worth noting. It would at best it would be the initial stages of, hey, gee, maybe at some point we should talk. Which is still
how
probably
long did it take for us
but,
and us and the North Vietnamese with the Chinese and the Russians and everybody to finish that set of negotiations? What, it was like 2 years, wasn't it? Before we.
Yeah, that sounds about right. That's about right.
Yeah, and that was when they had, quote, honest brokers to help make the deal a reality. And who's standing up to be an honest broker that both sides will accept right now? Nobody. Because the Russians aren't going to buy anybody on the Western side, and who's a NATO member or even a close associate of NATO. So that kind of reduces the number of people that can act as kind of a guarantor of whatever agreement is signed.
All right. Xandring, did you have anything that you wanted to ask or talk about here?
Strangely quiet.
I always get concerned when Xandring's quiet. I'm wondering what he's planning.
Why does this thing does not like letting me talk?
No,
Skype doesn't like letting me talk.
Now we can hear you.
Yeah.
Oh, okay. Skype muted me and told me I was not worthy enough to participate in this discussion because my level of knowledge was too low, and said that, no, you just need to sit in the corner and listen and learn.
Skype requires secret handshakes, which obviously you have not been provided.
I have not. No, it's just good to hear somebody who actually has a clue of what's going on over there, because there's so many different conflicting reports that I've been getting about from different angles, and it's like, okay, what the heck is actually going on?
That's one of the reasons. I mean, Commander McMillan, already has such extensive background in this, but then B actually researches it, so he's ahead of it, and he's dropping me links oftentimes ahead of the other ones we get in the Discord, which is interesting, because the ones we get ahead of the Discord are usually already ahead of mainstream news. So it's
you forgot the most important one. C, McMillan always qualifies his statements to saying it might be.
Yeah, well, that's okay. No, that's one I'm gonna take some issue with. So what do you think's going on? Well, it might be that Putin's about to get ousted. Then again, he might stay there for another 10 or 20 years. It's like, okay,
might be space aliens are invading. I don't know.
It could be.
I'm telling you, we just so every once in a while, I'm just like, we need to start cutting off hands. Because on the other hand,
there's a reason for that. Just give him a minute. Let him finish that thought. Because I'm just going to say, as Andring, when you start at that part of the thought, first of all, we get demonetized pretty quickly. I'm just going to say that, but I'm used to it, so it's not that big a deal. But yeah, could you maybe, for some people in our audience, explain why you think we need to be cutting off hands? Yeah, please. I would appreciate it.
You don't want to just leave me stuck with that Shandring guy. He's kind of crazy. He's advocating we just start cutting people's hands off.
No, I can give them that idea on its own. But when we're on, that's what I just say behind your back. I make sure that everybody already thinks that. But when we're on stream, money's involved. It's a thing.
I see.
Yeah.
Hands is a little severe.
Especially.
How about ears?
No, it's got to be hands.
One.
Because
it has to be hands.
No, just one hand. And here's why. All of the political commentators that start talking about areas where we don't have direct knowledge or can't observe really, really closely, they'll give out a nice thought out possibility of what's going on, and then they'll be like, but on the other hand, it might be the opposite.
Okay, you win.
Yeah. So that is Andrew's like, we need to start cutting off. We don't have enough hands, first of all, for all the other hands that there seem to be in all these things. We need to start cutting off hands. I want a simple, like, what the fuck is going on? It's like, okay, that's fair. Oh, dear Lord. Oh, all right. So
maybe we'll start getting more straight answers.
It's supposed to be a mild winter now. Ukraine has actually. This was something I was thinking about this earlier because I'd said this about people that frustrate me, and I get my fair share of trolls, and I get my fair share of people who are really trying to cause trouble in one way or another. And I had said this once before. The ones that bother me, okay, tenacity is a difficult thing, intelligence is a difficult thing, but the ones that really I get worried about are the ones that are patient. The ones that are patient. They sit there, they watch, they wait for you to do something, and then they, it's like, did Nick really just advocate did Nick's co-host really just say we should be cutting off children's hands? One of the things that's been really interesting to watch with Ukraine here is their patience. They've planned everything out. When they had opportunities that might derail plans for the future, they don't necessarily take them, and they have made plans that go months in advance and take a tremendous amount of work. And I think that patience has been a huge amount of their success. Now, you had said earlier, in crossing the bridge, here they are taking an opportunity. Everybody's preparing for winter over there, so now they're at least partially over the bridge. They haven't been able to bring heavy equipment over. The bridges are blown. We saw that they blew all the bridges. So I don't know how long it's going to take them to get anything over there. Do you think they're going to try to continue to capitalize on this success and go forward even more, maybe even to Crimea, or they're going to say, okay, it's getting a little risky, and we're going to wait until we can get everything over. And by that point, I think winter is going to be starting to set in, and they may have to limit how far forward they can go anyway.
Well, we know that at least one of the ferries that the Russians were using was captured intact, and they have been using that to move some equipment across. If they can get more craft of that nature, then they can perhaps establish a viable bridgehead. But to my thinking, short of having an intact pontoon bridge or something, you can't really mount an offensive across a river of that size when the only supply medium you have are a few ferries shuttling supplies back and forth. We also know that the Russians kind of built a temporary defensive line. It's not extensive trench networks or the pillboxes that we've heard about and so forth. But it's at least something that they built just outside artillery range for any Ukrainian artillery emplaced on the northern/western side of their side of the river. So they may have just decided we're going to pull our troops back because from the oral accounts we've received from intercepted phone calls and prisoner interrogations that I've seen, interviews of Russian prisoners, the artillery fire is having a profound effect on their morale. The joke is that Russian artillery fires off a few rounds and they're done for the day. And if they land somewhere near the village they were supposed to be aiming at, it's a good barrage. With the Ukrainians, it's like every time somebody sticks their head up or goes outside to use the toilet, an entire battery of artillery immediately dumps shells on them. They're literally living in their trenches.
Mm.
So it from their perspective, it's like being back in World War I. Supplies aren't getting to the front. Troops are saying that they go multiple days at a time before they get fed. They don't have any rations coming forward. They're drinking captured caught rainwater, not captured, but you get my...
Yeah.
Well, because they aren't getting water supplies from the rear. Wounded are not being evacuated because it's too dangerous for ambulances to come forward and take people out. There was one particularly sad interview I heard, or not interview, but a discussion between a guy and a friend on their cell phone, where he said, yeah, this guy had been wounded and we had him in our bunker, and over the course of 4 days, we watched him slowly die. And several times every day, we'd call back to headquarters and say, we need to get somebody to evacuate him. He's going to die. We can't get a vehicle up there. And just, it's not the loss of that one guy that's the tragedy from their perspective. It's the fact that everybody in that bunker and everybody in that platoon and everybody in that company knows that that's going on, that somebody who was wounded had to stay there and die a slow, agonizing death because they couldn't bring up support to evacuate the man.
And if he lasted 4 days, I have to believe it was treatable.
Yeah. So, all that added together, you get a sense of how bad things are. And it's made worse to some extent from their perspective because word is now beginning to clearly seep back away from the battle zone into the home front, so that people are doing everything they can to avoid mobilization and conscription. They're hiding out. They're fleeing to foreign countries. They're refusing to go. We know units that have been formed are essentially mutinying and refusing to go to the front. The situation is untenable. You'd say it can't last, but this is Russia. Who cares how many people we kill and how bad the suffering is, as long as the assholes in the top get to stay at the top. That's all that matters.
Russia does have a unique psychology that makes the calculations on this rather difficult. I was about to ask, and I'm still going to ask, even though I now know it's an unfair question. I'm going to ask anyway. You've studied this. I mean, a graduate of the Naval War College. We've talked about some of the work you've done in the study of these kinds of things. So you have a pretty good idea of what this looks like and the effect it has. The fact that it's Russia changes, I think, the calculus in part, at least, because the Russian psychology is rather different. But having said all that, how long can this continue before either there's a complete collapse and mutiny, and or somebody really does take out Putin? See, totally unfair question. I am aware that
it isn't. It isn't. It's an unfair question because there's no easy answer. And in my opinion, I don't think somebody taking out Putin results in an end to the conflict. I think, if anything, it potentially escalates the conflict.
Wait for it. Here it's going to come. But on the other hand...
Thank you, my friend. Thank you. Yeah, and so I don't see that that's going to happen. I also have a lot of doubt that you're going to see a bottom-up groundswell of frustration and dissatisfaction by the Russian people. It's, again, not something that's necessarily in their psychology. The few times it has happened, it's pretty much been stamped out or co-opted by other authoritarian figures. I mean, the Bolsheviks are effectively a bunch of foreign imports. They're all Russian, but it's the Germans who shipped them in to cause the revolution. So it's not a naturally occurring revolution. The one time you actually have something like that is the Decembrist movement in the 1820s, and it's brutally suppressed. They kill a couple thousand guys who were very peacefully just standing there saying, we want to talk to the Tsar, we want to have these grievances at least heard, if not addressed, and instead they roll in the artillery and just mow these people down. And I think you look through Russian history and it's just replete with that kind of activity, that kind of behavior that goes on and on and on again and again and again. So I think, Putin gets eliminated, and who's going to rise up? We haven't really seen anybody yet emerge as a rational actor saying, okay, Putin needs to go, and here's what we need to do to get out of this freaking mess.
So you're advising Biden, and Biden says, okay, I want your best guess as to where we're going to be in 6 months. But because I'm a nice guy, I'm Joe Biden. I will give you 2 hands to answer that question.
Oh, thank you. What do we do in the next 6 months? The first thing I would suggest is try to find somebody to act as the honest broker here, and convince them to go in and approach both sides. I mean, they'll already have kind of the secret under the table from us to the Ukrainians saying, yeah, you need to accept this guy because he'll do things. But it's somebody to bring the Russians to the table so we can actually get a realistic discussion started. I think that's number one. Number two, you have to talk to Zelensky and find some way to make him understand that there is no scenario that really equates to ultimate victory for Ukraine. Because if you even manage to expel all the Russians from Ukrainian territory, that doesn't stop them from continuing to mount missile and airstrikes from their own territory. Unless you drive straight to Moscow, and let's face it, I don't think that's a realistic possibility. You need to find some way to bring them to the table and offer them some way that they can exit this with their heads held high. Or at least not cut their head off, if you will. So I don't see that that's, for 6 months. I think that's a good task for us the United States and to some extent the NATO allies. That would be, I think, the most effective strategy we could pursue at this point to try to end this thing. Short, I hate to say it, short of a full NATO intervention to bring an end to it, which God knows nobody wants to see happen because we know what that's likely to trigger. There's no definitive end to a war like this. It just drags on and on. And as badly as the Russians are doing, we know that the Ukrainians are suffering hugely, and it's non-sustainable for them over the long run too.
Well, and at some point, countries are going to start to pull support if it goes on past a certain point, and the U.S. may pull support whether the citizens like it or not, whoever, because the more control Republicans get, they've made it clear that they're going to reduce support at a minimum, if not pull it outright. So unless Xandring has any more questions specifically on Ukraine, what I'm going to do is actually ask a couple of domestic questions. The Republicans have captured the House. They have not captured the Senate. Do you think they're going to try to pull funding from Ukraine? And if so, how is that likely to work out for Ukrainians, do you think?
I think they will start to explore that as an option. I think they realize that across the country, even within their own circles, there's a significant amount of support from the American public for the Ukrainian cause right now. And to just outright say, oh, we're pulling all our stops and the Ukrainians get to die in droves, we don't give a damn, will probably cost them more than it gains them. So they'll do some exploratory polls. They'll perhaps, talk about ratcheting down the level of support that is being granted to them while still giving them something significant, but not as much. I don't see that for them, the Ukrainian question is that big and decisive an issue that it's worth their pursuing.
And then, I'm sorry.
I was going to add to that. And to some extent, I think we already see that because the big noises that they're already making before the new incoming representatives have taken office is they're already starting to talk about launching a whole slew of investigations and everything into various Democratic people.
Yeah.
It's we're going to get revenge for what you did to our glorious orange overlord.
Yeah, which by the way, I mean, the reason that ticks me off, and I'm aware most of the people that I hang with are as aware of it as I am, so I'm preaching to the choir. But they want to investigate, Hunter Biden. They have no business investigating Hunter Biden. He is a citizen, unless they're going to argue that his dad intervened in some way, in which case, yes, then he becomes a target for congressional investigation. But yeah, the January 6th committee went after, people that it should be going after, people who work for the U.S. government, mainly Trump and other. It's not targeting political. The only reason to go after Hunter Biden is to try to make the president look bad, and the number of people who are like, well, we don't care, we want to,
I think they totally know there's no real case there.
Well, even if there were,
and that doesn't matter to them. Yeah, all it is to make sure that it gets into the news so that their commentators can all go pointing the finger and saying, oh, look how evil and corrupt and sinister those people are. And okay, great. That's the way politics is devolved in this country, that it's all about just throwing mud or dung at the other side. we don't actually talk about real issues or try to find real solutions anymore. It's all about stopping the other side from getting anything that it wants. Even if it hurts ourselves, we're going to stop the other side from getting what they want. Okay, well, we're all freaking idiots if that's the case.
Well, so that brings me to my last question. Did you watch well, I know you watched, actually, because I saw you in the live chat. We watched the announcement of Donald Trump that he was starting his third campaign for office. He's now officially a candidate for president of the United States. What did you think of his speech?
I think you saw my comment in the.
Yeah, I did. I was watching.
Just a series of, what do they call them, emoticons of a face of somebody laughing uproariously, interspersed with a face of somebody vomiting, and just repeating that.
I saw there was 2 rows.
That's exactly.
You almost completed 2 rows.
Yeah, that's exactly how I feel about this nonsense. Is that, so much of what comes out of his mouth is so patently absurd that it's almost like watching a Monty Python sketch, It just, it's, what in the hell? Oh, okay, it must be a laughing joke matter, And then you start thinking about what really is being said and done and realize, no, it's not a joke. This guy really is that freaking psychotic and egocentric and devoid of anything resembling empathy. In some ways, I think his
your audio cut out.
Democrats for that election.
Mm-hmm.
Can you hear me?
Yeah, you cut out for a second. Yeah.
Oh, yeah. I was going to say, I think his announcement that he's running is in some ways the best thing that could happen for the Democrats going in.
Oh, you're roboting.
It's sunspots.
It's sunspots. As Andrew says, it's sunspots. On the other hand, it might be something
that
else.
I'm in the same neighborhood.
Yeah.
or that. On the other hand, it might be that I'm in his neighborhood, sabotaging his internet connection because I am in Western Washington right now.
Oh, one of these days you got to go through the area. That's the great thing is there isn't very many areas of the U.S. that Xandering isn't in at some point in the near future. So, definitely the two of you should say hi and meet up and do lunch. I had lunch with Xandering. It was delightful. Yeah. So, oh, shoot. Should I say that I don't like to admit that publicly. I met with the guy. He was, whatever. No, we had a good time.
Person who was allegedly Xandering.
Yeah.
Yes.
So, I do think that the Dems are going to. The conversation that just happened, the show right before this was Professor Christopher 𝗲𝗲 of, oh dear Lord, psychology professor at
Rutgers.
Thank you.
Rutgers?
Yes. My brain is definitely reaching its limit there. You'd think I'd know that, but at any rate, so at psychology professor at Rutgers and Brooks, who we've had on a lot, and they really knows his shit when it comes to politics. There was the psychology of politics, and one of the things that Brooks pointed out, was that the ones who most follow Trump are the ones who shouldn't be on the internet at all. They're of an age where they can't understand or handle that torrent. It's a fire hose of data coming at you. My generation's much better with it, but we're still not entirely native to it. So we can still get overwhelmed by it, and but we're better at sorting the information, finding the right stuff and what's wrong. But he was pointing out the number of Democrats, the number of the most recent generation, the younger generation that's of voting age, that grew up with the internet, that actually have a very good idea of what's really going on and what they value, and how they voted, and they voted in record numbers for this midterm, and they voted for Democratic candidates. And he's like, they can see through a lot of this stuff because they're actually very savvy on the internet, which for people my generation is kind of a challenge. We know how to, but it's not intuitive, and we have to sit there and have to say, okay, how do I verify this? And they just know. They just look at it and like, yeah, no, I know where that came from. And so anyways, I thought it was an interesting.
If it's brown and smells like it came out of a pasture.
Yeah, well, you'd think, but the amount of that Trump produces and gets away with is.
Oh yeah. But I mean, I'll give you. My father is and has always been a lifelong Democrat, and it's interesting when he asks about stuff, and you go, you do understand that that's a complete lie that has been fed to you by sources that know that your generation is gullible enough to fall for that, right? No, I had no idea. And he's not, he worked for 26 years as a field agent for the CIA. He's not dumb by any stretch of the imagination, but there's an element of belief from certain generations or people that, if you see it in print or you see it on television or hear it on the radio, it automatically has credibility. And the thought of, doubting it is almost anathema to them.
Most recent book I wrote was a biography of a prison psychologist, worked in Walpole Maximum Security Prison, one of the most brutal prisons in the country. And he's a psychologist, so he's there to give therapy to monsters you wouldn't believe. And a lot of them tried to trick him, and he was naive at first, but he spent 10 years there, and he learned how to spot a con, and he learned how, and he doesn't trust anybody ever about anything. I mean, it takes forever to it took a year to get to the point where it's like I could come into his house and we could talk, and I've been writing this shit the whole time. So one day he calls me up and says, Nick, I'm having a problem with my computer, and I know you're good with computers. Could you come take a look at it? I said, sure. I take a look at it, and this thing is totally under somebody else's control. It has been it is just fucked beyond all belief. I was like, how the hell did this happen? You've got antivirus, you've got this. And I'm looking at it, and I was just like, what was the last thing you did with this? He goes, oh, well, there was a problem with it, and Microsoft called. And Microsoft wanted to fix it. And so I let them in and with remote access, and they were going to fix it. And then I don't know what happened. And I was just like, did you pay them to fix it? He goes, oh yeah, I was like $200, but I didn't have much of a choice. I was just like, oh my God, you gave them your credit card.
Fixed it all right, buddy.
and a bright guy, really bright guy. And again, worked with the most devious criminal minds you can imagine. And by the way, didn't always trust me a whole heck of a lot. But a guy calls up, says he's Microsoft. Oh yeah, let me give you my credit card. Oh, dear Lord.
And the thing is, the scammers know that people from a certain era are very easy to get with these things. My mother almost fell for the, Grandma, I'm in Tijuana and I need to have you wire me $500 to get out of jail. Well, what are you doing down there? Oh, I can't talk about it, but I need the money. Don't tell Dad. Don't tell Dad. And, and so she calls me up to find out, is your son in Tijuana right now? No, he's in Oregon at university. I don't know why you think he's in. Well, I got a phone call. Did he ever say what his name was? No. And they know, or the other one that's hugely successful is the one where you call up and you pose as an IRS agent.
Oh yeah.
And and I mean, if you can come across as authoritative enough, older people will be terrified that, I'm going to be investigated and I'm going to have to pay a huge, and I'm going to be audited and the fines are going to bankrupt me and everything. And they just hand over everything to the scammer. And I know it happens to people who are from younger generations too, but let's be honest, those scams are very explicitly and deliberately targeted at older generations because they know those people will accept a statement of, I am an authority figure, you should obey me.
Well, I mean, to be fair, the IRS is a terrifying organization, and they
no kidding,
a lot more than older people, which is why we should probably just abolish it.
Yeah, it's a I've heard those and I've gotten them. The very first one that called, for a second it had me. I was just like, oh shit, why is the IRS calling? I was like, wait a minute, they didn't use my name. I was like, they always do that because they know that people should be looking out for scammers, so they'll use their... I was like, and I don't have any problems with the IRS. And they wouldn't leave a message like that say, call back. I was just like, this is...
Strangely, he has a West African accent.
Yeah, and I got to call India to pay, West... Yeah, I actually got something similar. I got an email about 3 weeks ago. It said, Dear Mr. Soutter, had the name, Dear Mr. Soutter, we are pleased and delighted to inform you that we would very much like to have you run as Prime Minister of UK. And I checked and turned out it was legit. It was legit. They were like, we know you're not a citizen, but we're out here. Nobody wants to do it. You're last in line. Would you mind coming over? And I was...
Nobody from the Conservative Party is willing to stand up for the office. Would you accept it?
Yeah, would you please become Prime Minister? You'd really help us out. And I was like, no. But thanks for thinking of me.
I like my cabbage just fine. Thank you very much.
Oh, shit. All right.
For those who don't know, the reference is they had a picture of, what was her name? I can't even remember anymore.
So short-lived.
Put next to a cabbage, and they said, which one will wilt fastest? And sure enough, she was out of office before the cabbage had rotted.
Well, and so she had the shortest term by a lot ever for a prime minister. She was replacing Boris Johnson, who at first, and he was just like, no, the rumors are false. I wasn't going to run. No, he was running. And he actually said he was considering running again. I'm just like, oh dear. Oh my. Yeah.
You do have a political death wish. Oh, good for you, lad.
Don't even. Oh my God. That and I don't know if you saw it, but we did a rundown and I covered what's going on Twitter, and that has just been so hilarious. I feel kind of bad because I think there are people who really, I think it's a cesspool, but there are people who enjoy it and who use it, and there are uses for it. In fact, it's not bad for news, believe it or not. But it's just, the memes coming out of there now from verified accounts, because I assume that they so it's just like the verified Tesla account. I thought of you when they were sending 10,000 Teslas to the Ukrainian army because there's no better explosive device on the market. For the Tesla certified account. Also from Tesla, yes, our stocks.
We know a lot about crashing.
Yeah, our stocks have been. Yeah, our stocks have been going down, but it's nothing to worry about. You can trust us. We know a lot about crashing. Yeah. That and then what was it? Oh yeah, a second Tesla has hit the World Trade Center.
Oh, God.
and we got them all on the Discord. Come check us out on the Discord, and check us out there too, because there was something else we were talking about on the Discord, and I was just like, come find us on the Discords where we source most of our material. But yeah, that's been. I don't think Twitter's going to make it. But Yeah.
Well,
So
my wife was telling me some of the stories about, because he put out this ultimatum that if you are going to leave, you need to have filed your paperwork resigning your position from Twitter by this time, or you will completely lose your severance package, et cetera, et cetera. And so they were literally, and as we approached the timeline, he decided, okay, we're going to call a meeting because he had so many people leave. He was getting worried. We're going to call a meeting and we're going to talk to the people remaining and give them a pep talk and everything. And apparently, right at the time mark that the ultimatum was set to expire, like 2/3 of the people who were in this mandatory, you must attend this meeting, logged off as he's talking, basically flipping him the bird and saying, yeah, we're leaving too.
well, and he
I don't know how you can keep a company running when, probably out of the 30,000 original employees that built the company with you, you only, or built not with you, but for the original owner.
Yeah.
You've forced, 26,000 of them out.
Well, and he fired half his coders, and he decided the best way to determine which half would be to go by lines of code. So the ones who had written the most lines of code can stay. The bottom 50% can go. Now, yes, a few of those in the bottom 50% are slackers who don't do their jobs well. That's so, in principle, it sounds like not a bad idea, and he will hit those. The other problem, however, is that the best programmers you put on your toughest your toughest problems, and it takes them forever to write 2 lines of code. But those 2 lines are so elegant and solve the problem. Yeah.
Yeah, it's the old quantity versus quality paradigm. And he obviously has no freaking clue what he's talking about.
He fired all of their best.
What do you expect? Yeah, what do you expect from a guy who has been lying for years about the fact that, I went to, what was it, Harvard or something? No, he didn't. He never graduated from college. It's a lie, and it's been proven it's a lie. But he can't come out and admit, yeah, I've been bullshitting you for years.
It's
yeah. Who else do we know that does stuff like that? Let me think for a bit.
Yeah, that really,
it's on the tip of my tongue. Let me go get an orange while we're talking.
Don't forget to get the good marmalade Mussolini brand.
Yes, exactly.
Oh, well, so Xander,
ever since Aaron Raw called him that, I can't get that out of my head.
So, Xander, any final thoughts on when? I mean, you and I had the ability to talk about it that night, but we also, I think, wanted to cut it short. But any final thoughts on either anything else we discussed or on the that particular speech?
Please don't make me redredge that speech up.
Okay. Well, I've heard somebody's done a fact check of it, and I'm.
And this from an acknowledged conservative.
He's a conservative.
As I was saying when the sound was breaking up, I think this in some ways is the best thing that could happen for the Democrats in 24, because his being in the campaign is probably going to split the party.
Well, I think that's true. I think now they have to worry about getting him out as quickly as possible. They want DeSantis to be the guy. Murdoch wants DeSantis to be the guy. The longer he stays in, the less time they have to rally around one guy. But this
quick solution: don't shut down the January 6th investigation committee.
That's it. Yeah. Well, and I was curious.
They'd be done with him real quick if the Republicans got on board with that.
Well, one of the things. Well, no, I said this earlier. Was I think what you're going to see is because the other thing is he did something really fucking stupid. I mean, from a political standpoint, suicide. Well, he did a lot of genuinely stupid things, but this took the cake, and it had nothing to do with most things. He said that he was for term limits. He was for removing lobbying and making it so that once they quit, they can't lobby anyone. I am actually with him on the lobbying. I think he's right about that. Hold on. Hold on. I think I need to get a Brillo pad and just hold. I need to take a shower, and because no matter how many times I say it, that he's right on that.
I agreed with Trump.
I know. He's right. Now I think he's right by accident. I mean, even a stopped clock, he's just doing these things. But here's the problem. For a lot of these people, that's their retirement fund. They're going to go. They're going to become lobbyists. They're going to make a lot of money for doing absolutely nothing except having their insiders. The lobbying is the bread and butter to all of those people, including Mitch McConnell. He is basically saying, I'm going to take out the knees of everybody who's been my ally for the last however many years. That, for somebody who's already weakening in the party, is about the dumbest thing you could possibly fucking say. So I think Mitch McConnell and what's his name, the guy who's going to be the new majority leader and the new speaker, sorry, McCarthy.
Kevin McCarthy?
Yeah, I think McCarthy is going to come out and say something along the lines of, we know for a fact Trump is innocent in the the January 6th shenanigans, but the only way to prove it is to, fund the January 6th committee fully and watch them just fall flat on their face as they try to demonstrate this. So we've doubled their funding and we're sending them a couple more people, and you'll watch and see them exonerate him. Have a nice day. That's what I'm expecting.
I would not be surprised.
Yep. All right. Well, that's, we'll keep an eye out for what they do first as a really good, because they have to solve that one quick. Now I think he's going to be disqualified by the law, even his own laws. He's going to be disqualified, but we'll save all that for later. Zandering, thank you very much for joining us. Good to see you, and I hope, Zandering, you will join us tomorrow when we have on, hopefully have on Operator Starsky, 1 p.m. Eastern. But thank you for being here. Good to see you.
Great to be here. I wish I knew more about Ukraine so I could contribute more intellectually. But on the other hand, at least I'm halfway decent.
Oh, come on, Sandrick. Just make the shit up like I do.
That was a good callback.
Okay.
That was, no, you're not, we don't. The number one qualification for coming on in time is that you appear qualified to talk about the subject that you're opining. The number two qualification, we'll figure that out and we'll put it on the sheet there. But we've got the first one down. So, So, Commander, thank you again for joining us and for bullshitting with us and for not taking off too many hands. And we look forward to seeing you tomorrow with Operator Starsky. He is a Ukrainian National Guardsman. He is right there. He was on the front lines for a while. He was pulled from his unit. His unit is still on the front lines. On his channel, he goes and he interviews members of his unit, and you can follow what's going on with them. It's you get to see what's going on. It's some pretty tough stuff, but we are going to have him on to discuss the war tomorrow at 1 p.m. Eastern. Any final thoughts before we go, Commander?
Nope, just thanks for having me. It's been a gas as always.
Thank you, sir. All right, so we will see all of you tomorrow, 1 p.m. Eastern. Thank you so much for joining us. Have yourselves a great rest of your evening.